Welcome to the Clothes-Free Living Update, brought to you by the folks at clothesfreelife.com. We're excited to be able to bring you this regular feature of the clothes-free news from around the web, information related to clothes-free living, and much more. Now here's your host, Earl D.
Of the Clothes-Free Living Update. I want to start off with a couple of important bits of news about this podcast and some other podcasts that we're going to be having available in the not too distant future. So we started this podcast a couple of months ago, probably about 3-4 months ago. And we were originally broadcasting live because that was what the platform that we were using allowed for. And then we switched to a different podcasting broadcast platform, which gave us the continued opportunity to broadcast live. But we've discovered along the way that that may not be the most effective way to reach our listeners and give the content that we want to offer to those of you who are regular listeners, and to also the newer folks who we'd like to reach through this podcast. So we're probably going to have live broadcasts in the future, but at this point, most of the broadcasts are going to be like this one, pre-recorded and then made available on demand. And then in the future, if we have a special event or special situation, then we'll do some live broadcasts at that point. There are a couple of interviews that we're lining up right now that might lend themselves to that. So we're looking forward to that as well. But the podcast will be available on demand once it's recorded each week. Available on our Spreaker site, SPREKER.com and /clothes-free-life, on iTunes, on Stitcher as well, and links to it on our website, clothesfreelife.com. But the even bigger news, aside from the podcast being pre-recorded, is that we're going to be adding a podcast under this name, the Clothes-Free Living Update, back to our Wednesday podcast lineup. And this podcast on Friday will become, in a week, it'll become the Straight Outta Clothes podcast, and the format's going to change. So we've been doing pretty much a 45-minute format since we started the podcast, and we spent 15 minutes or so doing news and updates and things like that each week, and then doing interviews and some talk about issues relating to naturism, nudism, and clothes-free living in the other time. And we just feel like we haven't been able to give either of those our best effort. So we are going to split those two, and there'll be a weekly or maybe even bi-weekly Clothes-Free Living update that'll come to you in a 15-minute format, bringing you the latest news and buzz about things out there relating to clothes-free living. And that is going to be called the Clothes-Free Living Update. This time slot, or the format for interviews, reviews, and talk, will become the Straight Out of Clothes podcast, just relating to issues of your life and my life as it relates to clothes free, and hearing from a variety of people around the clothes-free community and some people outside the clothes-free community who are doing things related to clothes-free living. So you won't lose anything. In fact, you'll gain some stuff. I think will be able to give you more focused news and information, and more focused interviews and talk, because we won't be worried about splitting time with that stuff and trying to figure out how to give everything its due in one podcast. You'll have 2 podcasts for that. And so the format for each will be very different. One will be straight news and information. The other will be more talk and commentary and interviews and reviews and things like that about things related to naturism, nudism, and clothes-free living. So that'll start next week. And our topic this week, though, is decolonizing. Excuse me. Our topic this week is decolonizing clothes-free living or naturism. And dehumanizing was in my head because a lot of what's happened with the colonization, as I want to call it, of naturism is that the people who I talk about as the first naturists, people on the African continent who lived at that time in 2 centuries ago or more, in a way that fits perfectly in the definition, the modern definition of what naturism is all about. A lot of those folks were that naturist life, that clothes-free life, was looked at in a negative light by colonizers, and they were dehumanized because they lived clothes-free. They were considered more animalistic, more like animals, more like barbaric people who weren't civilized because they lived on the African continent and in a lot of places, other places in the world where the native culture was all about wearing minimal or no clothing. Those cultures, those peoples were looked at as less than human because of that when they encountered colonizers. And one of the things that I think is really important, if naturism, nudism, and clothes-free living is going to be able to expand and be more diverse and not just be a purely European phenomenon where only people from of a European background or culture are able to participate or see themselves in it, that we have to begin to decolonize this practice of clothes-free living and naturism. And that's what I'm going to talk about for the rest of our time today. And by way of introducing a new podcast that we're going to be launching in about a week, that will focus on giving voice to people of color in the naturist and clothes-free community. And that podcast is called Bear, Black, and Brown, and it will look at naturism and clothes-free living and nude recreation through the lens of people of color. That's black, brown, and other people who are not from a European background. And our intention, to be very clear about that, and I say we because it's going to be co-hosted with one of our editors at clothesfreelife.com, Hantony Hart. She's going to co-host that with me, Earl D. And our intention is to try to not to be negative about European expressions of naturism, but to create a positive connection for people of color and naturism, looking back at the history of naturism and the participation of people of color in naturism and clothes-free living, and how folks today can make that connection as well, how people of color today can make that connection. And so Bear, Black, and Brown will be coming online next week. And you can look for that also on our Spreaker site, SPREAKER.com and /close free life. And so the thought today is to just talk about what that means to decolonize naturism. And a couple of incidents really kind of prompted my thinking about this. I've had a couple of people, whenever I've tried to share something about clothes free living or how simple nudity is used or expressed in from a culture that is not non-European, African American or maybe Hispanic or Caribbean, I get a lot of knee-jerk reactions from European people who are participating in naturism and clothes-free living, and it's always odd to me because a lot of those same folks keep saying, "Hey, we gotta expand and we gotta be more diverse, and this is all about equality and so forth." But when I try to share from that perspective, using that voice, from the voice of a person of color. And if you're listening to this podcast and weren't aware that as a person of color, then that might be news to you. But if when I do that and share from the perspective of a person of color, I get a lot of pushback. People don't like the idea that maybe African Americans have a unique perspective to bring to naturism and clothes-free living. People seem to respond negatively when I suggest that the people on the African continent were the first naturists because they were living clothes-free. They didn't call it that. That was just a part of their life. Their life was a clothes-free life because of the geographic region in which they live, and that it didn't necessitate wearing a lot of clothing, and most clothing was much of the clothing that they did wear was ceremonial clothing, and so living life clothes free was not something that had to be added on like it was in Europe when naturism in its modern day incarnation was born, because they weren't in a colder climate in that situation. They were in cities in that situation. And that was not the case for the Africans, the pre-colonial Africans. And I think that's something, I'm never sure why they respond that way negatively to that, because it should be something that I think people should be excited to know that there's another way to communicate the value and the importance of naturist or clothes-free living. But it's been very interesting. We've, for instance, on our social network, My Clothes Free Life, we started a group like that for people of color, and someone signed up for the site and was signing up for that group and got information about that group, and thought that, based on the description of the group being for, but not exclusively for, but oriented towards people of color, that we were being racist and we were not promoting the equality of people. And it's always odd to me when people who come from a place of majority complain when people who come from a place of minority or not non-majority are trying to find their own voice. And I think it's incredibly important for people of color to understand that naturism and clothes-free living is not something that's completely foreign to their heritage and experience. And I think the other part of decolonizing naturism is that European people need to understand that you might have a built-in perspective that is not always accurate. It might be stereotypical. And that was very obvious to me, happened very obviously to me this weekend. I was at a clothing optional venue, just hanging out, just taking up some sun. And there was a couple, interracial couple, not within earshot of where I was sitting. And they had several conversations with people who passed by, and they were members of this clothing optional venue. And they had lots of conversations with people who were also members of this venue. And those conversations came and went as people passed by and checked in with them and so forth. But one conversation that that was happening loudly enough for me to hear it quite clearly caught my attention, because they were talking with a couple with a European background about visiting different places and different clothing optional or clothes free venues, and what it was like, and what the cities that those places were in were like, and what the kinds of things that there were to do there. And the woman in the interracial couple from at one point in the conversation talked about not feeling safe moving around cities where she didn't know anybody or really know her way around, and mentioned a couple of cities where they had been, and they had gone to clothing optional venues there, but chose to stay close to the venue rather than wandering around too much because they didn't really know the place. And one of them was a large city in Florida. And the couple that they were talking to took that in, and the wife of this couple that they were talking to, this white couple that they were talking to, made the leap from not feeling comfortable because you didn't know a place to saying that when they're in a city, if they see on a map or with the GPS that they're being routed on a place called Martin Luther King Boulevard, that they stay away from that and find a different route, because you know what those neighborhoods are like. And I was floored. I couldn't believe that someone was saying that someone was determining what the behavior of people in a particular area was going to be like based on the name of a street. And she prefaced this by saying, now, I'm not prejudiced or anything. And then she made a completely prejudicial statement. And the reason I bring that up is because a lot of times I hear people, especially online, but not exclusively online, but I hear people who are from the majority culture, from a white or European background, say that naturism is all about equality and everybody's accepted. And what strikes me about that is, how are you accepted? Are people of color or people who are different accepted because you feel that we're safe and we're okay, but you don't feel other people from our racial or ethnic group are okay because of where they live related to the name of a street? I mean, that's a huge prejudice. That's a huge disconnect from the idea that people are equal, and that in that environment, uh, everybody is treated the same. And if you're thinking that outside of a close free or naturist environment, you're thinking it inside a close free or naturist environment. And that's what this conversation that I overheard really showed. And I think if we're going to be honest about wanting to be diverse and wanting to be more open and wanting to have more people of color involved in the close free community and in the naturist and nudist community, then we have to stop this silly idea that somehow because someone is a naturist or a nudist, they don't have any prejudices. And that is a huge step, in my opinion, in this podcaster's opinion, towards decolonizing naturism and close free living. Because what it says is that it suggests that that we're somehow, as naturists, as nudists, we're somehow different in terms of the things that we have a preference for, or the things that we have opinions about and beliefs about than everybody else. And the reality is that just isn't true. We did a post on the website closefreelife.com a couple of months ago about the dirty little secret that naturism doesn't want you to know. And one of the things I said in that post was, look, there are people who are naturists and nudists who are prejudiced. There are people who are naturists and nudists who are not prejudiced. That being a naturist or nudist somehow does not miraculously take away our prejudices, our biases, our stereotypes. The only thing that does that is actively, intentionally becoming aware that you have those prejudices, those stereotypes, those biases, and then beginning to unpack them and what they mean. And this woman who made this comment clearly was not consciously aware of how prejudicial a statement she was making. I think her husband was, because shortly after she said that, he said he started up the golf cart and took off with her because the conversation just ground to an immediate halt with this interracial couple. And I half wanted to go over to them and ask them how they felt about what was just said, but it was not my place to do that. But it really stuck in my head and really got me thinking about how we can decolonize naturism and not allow naturism to get stuck in some of the same social patterns that are out in the broader society, where the thing that's unknown, the thing that's uncertain, the person that you're not really familiar with or haven't spent a lot of time around becomes automatically something to be feared or something that's negative. And I think if we don't deal with that, then it's going to be really impossible for naturism and naturist organizations and naturist venues and nudist parks and venues and camps to be attractive to people of color. Having said all that, though, it's also true to say that I've found that by and large, naturists and nudists are pretty friendly people. But the big caveat is once they get to know you. And so it becomes really, really important for us to be honest about that, so that people who are people of color who may not be very engaged at this point in this community can know what is the pathway to being welcomed. You know, I remember the very first time I wanted to go to a clothing optional venue. That was my biggest concern, was how I was going to be responded to in that environment as someone who's a person of color. And I, you know, even called around and kind of just let people know who I was to those places I was looking at, so that I wouldn't be show up there and they'd go, oh, okay, we didn't expect you to be a person of color. We're not sure we're ready for this. And there are other people who will benefit from this decolonizing of naturism and clothes-free living. I think people who are from the LGBT community will benefit from it, because, again, when difference gets valued, it's not just going to be different in terms of skin color or culture and race or ethnicity or things like that. It can be in other areas, whether it's in terms of gender identity or sexual orientation. And there's still places in the clothes-free naturist community, still venues where it's not okay for a gay person or a lesbian person or a transgender person or a gender fluid person to show up. And they're not going to be warmly welcomed. So there's that whole effort to decolonize naturism is going to benefit a broad range of people. And the thing that it's important about that is there are people out there who are people of color who want to participate in this life. They want to live clothes-free. They want to be engaged. But they're not going to do that if they're not going to feel safe, if they're not going to feel welcomed. There's someone who I'm in communication with regularly who is very oriented towards their heritage as a person of African descent, who's terrified, because I've had these conversations, terrified of going to a place where their skin color or their African perspective is not going to be welcomed or is going to stand out. And as it stands right now, this person won't go anywhere that they're not confident they're going to be around other people of color, because it's such a scary, insecure kind of experience to be able to think about being in. And, you know, last summer at a clothing optional venue I was at for a music festival, it was interesting to see how many people there were these people of color who came in, and there was a family that I had an opportunity to talk to a lot, and they were talking about how they really wanted to be a part of something like this, and they were thinking about even getting a membership, maybe getting a lot there that they could come and bring their family and introduce their kids and all this kind of stuff. But they were really testing the water to see if they were going to be welcomed. And I think that is really an important thing that we have to, if we're serious about having the community grow and become more diverse, it can't be about just becoming like the majority of the folks who are already participating. There has to be room created. One of the things that our one of our editors, Anthony Hart, talks about a lot is holding space for people that you want to participate in something. I'd hope to have Anthony on today to talk about this with us as a way of bringing introducing the Bear Black and Brown podcast, but some technical issues prevented that. But that idea that she often shares of holding space, I think is a powerful one. And I think that is what is going to be telling for naturist, nudist, and clothes-free organization, is whether or not they can hold space for people who are different. And if you can do that, I think we go a long way to decolonizing naturism. And that question, what would you do with a person of, for instance, a Muslim background who might want to explore that experience? I'm not talking about somebody who's, radical, but somebody who wants to explore that. There are a ton of people who don't fall into the usual stereotype of what a Muslim is. There was a guy who I followed on Twitter for the longest while until the Arab Spring broke out in Egypt, who was actively trying to live within that context, a clothes-free life. And he kind of disappeared from the radar screen after the Arab Spring hit Cairo and all. And some of the things that came out from that, I think, made him have to go underground in terms of that, because it really wasn't safe for him. Well, what if he shows up at one of our venues or one of our clubs or one of our events or gatherings? How is he going to be received? I think that's really important for us, a question for us to talk about. And the last thing I want to talk about in terms of decolonizing naturism and clothes-free living is to understand that every person from a particular group is not the same. And you really have to take every person on their own merit, on their own presentation. A couple of summers ago, had an experience where I saw a large group of African Americans come into a clothing optional venue where I was camping. And, they got a lot of attention from the folks who were there. And that's that's a good thing, I think, because it was 3 couples. And I think, when you have couples, that's always something that folks want to encourage at clothing optional venues. But then there were couples of color, so I think that was even better. But their behavior was not the way I chose to behave at this venue. And, I would have hated for their behavior to be perceived as reflective of mine and all other people of color. And they came to this venue on one of those free weekends that clothing optional venues often have to celebrate things like Nude Recreation Week or things like that. And, some of the group, not all, were a little over the top and weren't necessarily what I would say have been a good fit for that environment. And yet, if someone saw what they did and then it made the assumption that I'm the same way just because we have the same skin color, that would be a mistake. So this third element, I think, of understanding that people are different and that we can't make any assumptions about them just based on whatever we think we know about a particular group. Individuals are what we need to focus on and let each individual and their behavior guide how you interact and how you deal with them. So I want to sum up this idea of dehumanizing naturism. One, allow for alternate histories that don't come at the history of naturism from a purely European perspective. Understand that other cultures, have a history of naturist living and clothes-free living as a part of their heritage, and use that to invite and engage those non-European, non-majority people groups. To understand that all of us have prejudices, and that naturism doesn't somehow magically get rid of those just because you're in a clothes-free environment. Doesn't mean you somehow leave your prejudices and your stereotypes that are ingrained in you at the gate of that resort, and somehow you become this incredibly open person that is going to accept everybody without prejudices. We all have certain preferences and prejudices, and they tend to focus around people who are like us, or at least people who we think we're like. And so just being honest about that is the second thing. And then finally, just understanding this idea that everybody is different. I mean, part of naturism and nudism and clothes-free living is that we have a different perspective on how we want to live than the general public and the general society, the broader society. And so appreciating that difference and just allowing for that difference in people, and then letting them give you an idea of who they are before projecting any kinds of behavioral expectations on them, I think is a really, really powerful way to decolonize naturism and clothes-free living. So that's the kinds of things I wanted to share with you today, and very much will reflect this. Today has reflected the format that we're going to be in, except we didn't have the interview because of technical difficulties. But and in the future, moving forward, as this becomes the Straight Outta Clothes podcast, My Clothes-Free Life, this is the format we're going to use. Some talk and commentary, interviews. We'll share reviews. We'll share things that look at the broad range of things related to clothes-free living, naturism, and nudism from a lot of different perspectives. And then the clothes-free living update will bring you news and information. Straight out news and information, not a whole lot of commentary, just to keep you updated to what's going on out there so that you can stay plugged in. I hope that you will join us for both of the podcasts and listen in and subscribe to both of them as they become available on the various podcasting platforms. And write us, drop us a line, send us an email or a tweet to us at on social media, and let us know what you think about these new changes and the new things that are coming up, the new podcasts that are coming up. You can reach out to us on Twitter at Live Clothes Free on Twitter. We're also on Google Plus at Clothes Free Life. We're on Instagram at Clothes Free Life, Pinterest on Clothes Free Life, and you can get the podcast on iTunes, on Stitcher, and also on YouTube. All of them under Clothes Free Living Update, and once we switch over under Straight Out of Clothes, My Clothes Free Life. So I hope you will check us out. Reach out to us on social media. Visit the website. Let us know what you think about all this, as well as the topic that we had for today. And look for our newest podcast coming online next week, Bear, Black, and Brown, which will look at exploring naturism, nudism, and clothes free living from the perspective of people of color.
Thanks for listening to the Clothes Free Living Update with Earl D. If you enjoyed this podcast, we hope you'll tell your friends. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website clothesfreelife.com for previous broadcasts. This has been a Clothes Free Life production. Join us next time for another edition of the Clothes Free Living Update.
This has been your host, Earl D. Stay safe and stay clothes free, friends.